Clara Rivers stood in front of her ornate full-length mirror, adjusting the delicate strap of her black lace robe. The fabric shimmered softly under the dim bedroom light, accentuating her graceful figure. At 42, Clara was the embodiment of elegance, a woman who exuded confidence and poise. Yet, as she gazed at her reflection, a faint melancholy flickered in her eyes, a look that had become all too familiar. Her husband, Jonathan Myers, had already left for the day. His departure was as mechanical as ever. A brief kiss on her cheek, a murmured "see you later," and the distant hum of his car engine fading into the morning stillness. Their once vibrant marriage now felt like a polished routine, all surface shine with little warmth beneath. Clara walked to the balcony, the early evening air cool against her skin. The city skyline stretched before her, its twinkling lights a stark contrast to the quiet hollowness she felt. She traced her fingers along the railing, her mind drifting back to a time when she and Jonathan couldn't bear to be apart. The memory felt like a relic from a distant life, buried under years of polite conversation and unspoken disappointment. It wasn't as though she hadn't tried. Clara had meticulously maintained her appearance, hoping it would reignite the spark between them. She filled their home with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee in the mornings, wore the dresses he once loved, and prepared his favorite meals. Yet, Jonathan seemed blind to her efforts, his focus consumed by endless meetings and late-night phone calls. The sound of laughter from a nearby street snapped Clara from her reverie. She peered over the balcony to see a young couple walking hand in hand, their faces illuminated by the glow of a street lamp. They paused, exchanging a playful kiss, their joy palpable. Clara felt a pang of longing, not just for the intimacy they shared but for the simplicity of connection itself. Later that evening, Clara slipped into her plush armchair with a glass of wine. The soft flicker of candlelight cast shadows across the room, adding an intimate warmth that she found both comforting and unsettling. She opened her journal, a sanctuary where she poured her thoughts without restraint. "Is this all there is?" she wrote, the words flowing freely. "I've built a life of refinement and grace, but I feel like a ghost in my own home. Does he even see me anymore?" The pen hovered over the page as she considered her next line. It wasn't just about Jonathan's absence. It was about the void he left behind, one that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. Clara closed the journal, her heart heavy yet relieved by the release. The clock struck 9, and Clara rose to draw the curtains. She paused for a moment, her hand resting on the cool fabric, and glanced at her reflection in the window. The woman staring back at her was alluring, mysterious, yet undeniably lonely. Just then, her phone vibrated on the side table, breaking the stillness. She picked it up and saw a message from her close friend, Isabel. "Thinking of you. Let's catch up soon." Clara smiled faintly, appreciating the gesture but knowing it wouldn't fill the ache inside her. As she prepared for bed, Clara resolved to bury her feelings once again. It was easier that way, safer. Yet deep down she knew that something was shifting. The steady rhythm of her life had begun to falter, and with it came the unsettling whisper of possibility. In the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Clara lay awake, her mind a tangle of memories and unspoken desires. The weight of her lace robe seemed to press against her skin, a reminder of both her allure and her isolation. She couldn't name the change brewing within her, but it was there, a spark waiting for the right moment to catch fire. As her eyes fluttered shut, a final thought surfaced, clear and sharp. Something has to change. The soft hum of conversation filled the gallery as Clara stepped inside, her heels clicking lightly against the polished marble floor. She had come alone, as she often did, seeking solace in the vivid strokes and muted tones of the artwork on display. Tonight's exhibit featured modern interpretations of love, each piece a fragmented mosaic of emotions that stirred something deep within her. Clara moved gracefully through the room, her silk dress brushing softly against her legs. She felt eyes on her, a fleeting sensation she had grown used to yet seldom acknowledged. At 42, she commanded attention without seeking it, her understated elegance drawing admiration in the same way a painting's quiet beauty captivated a viewer. She paused in front of a striking piece. A canvas filled with jagged lines and splashes of crimson, a chaotic yet mesmerizing depiction of longing. The artist's name, Ethan Cole, was scrawled in bold letters on the placard beside it. Clara tilted her head, tracing the lines with her gaze, trying to unravel the story beneath the chaos. Powerful, isn't it? The voice was smooth, warm, and startlingly close. Clara turned to find a man standing beside her. His posture relaxed yet confident. He appeared to be in his late 30s. His dark hair slightly tousled and his sharp jawline softened by a faint smile. His eyes, a striking shade of green, held hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "It is," Clara replied, her voice steady despite the sudden flutter in her chest. "Feels raw, honest." "That's what I aim for," he said, a hint of amusement in his tone. She blinked, surprised. "You're Ethan Cole." He nodded, extending a hand. "Guilty as charged." "And you are?" "Clara Rivers," she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his touch lingering just a moment longer than necessary. Ethan's gaze swept over her, not in a way that felt invasive but as though he were studying her, deciphering the emotions she carefully kept hidden. "What do you see in it?" he asked, nodding toward the painting. Clara hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I see a struggle," she said slowly, "between what we want and what we can have." A faint smile tugged at Ethan's lips. "You have a keen eye." They fell into easy conversation, discussing art, life, and the emotions that tied the two together. Ethan's charm was effortless, his words laced with a subtle flirtation that left Clara both exhilarated and uneasy. She hadn't felt this kind of attention in years, not since the early days of her marriage when Jonathan looked at her as though she were the only woman in the world. As the evening wore on, Clara found herself drawn to Ethan's magnetic presence. He was attentive, curious, and unafraid to delve into deeper topics that others might avoid. When she spoke, he listened intently, his gaze never wavering, as though her words held a weight he was eager to carry. Yet beneath the surface of their lively exchange lay a quiet tension, a pull that both intrigued and unsettled her. She knew the dangers of entertaining such a connection, the risks of letting her guard down, but the thrill of it was intoxicating. Eventually, the crowd began to thin, and the hum of conversation softened to a murmur. Ethan glanced at his watch, then back at Clara. "Would you allow me to walk you out?" She hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. Together, they stepped into the cool night air, the city lights casting a golden glow over the cobblestone street. For a moment, they walked in silence, the rhythm of their footsteps in sync. "Thank you for tonight," Clara said finally, her voice soft. "It's been refreshing." Ethan stopped and turned to face her, his expression serious yet gentle. "The pleasure was mine. I rarely meet someone who truly sees beyond the surface." Clara felt her cheeks flush under his gaze. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she offered a faint smile and a nod. As they reached the corner, Ethan handed her a small card with his number scrawled on it. "In case you ever want to talk again," he said, his voice low. Clara stared at the card, her fingers trembling slightly as she slipped it into her clutch. "Good night, Ethan," she murmured, turning to walk away. "Good night, Clara," he replied, his voice lingering in the air like a whisper. As she rounded the corner, her heart raced with a mix of exhilaration and dread. She tucked the card away, unsure whether she'd ever use it, yet knowing that something had already shifted within her. For the first time in years, Clara felt seen. And she wasn't certain she wanted to let that feeling go. The morning sunlight poured through the tall windows of Clara's bedroom, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor. She sat on the edge of her bed, the small card Ethan had given her resting between her fingers. His neat handwriting seemed to mock her with its simplicity, yet its presence carried an undeniable weight. She had barely slept, her thoughts circling around their encounter like restless birds. The way he had looked at her, listened to her, made her feel as though she were the center of a secret world only they shared. It lingered in her mind, intoxicating and dangerous. Clara sighed and placed the card on the nightstand, as though setting it down might silence the quiet hum of temptation it stirred. She reminded herself that she was a married woman, bound by years of shared history and the silent vows she had promised to uphold. Yet, a nagging voice in the back of her mind asked the question she didn't want to answer. When was the last time you truly felt alive? Downstairs, the house was eerily quiet, save for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Clara moved through the space, her silk robe trailing behind her, and poured herself a cup of coffee. The aroma was rich, familiar, yet it did little to calm her. Jonathan had left early again. His brief goodbye a hollow echo. His absence no longer hurt the way it once did. Instead, it left an emptiness she had grown accustomed to, like a faded scar. She sipped her coffee, her gaze drifting to the vase of fresh roses on the dining table. They were beautiful, vibrant, but like her marriage, they felt more like a decoration than something truly alive. The faint chime of her phone broke the silence. Clara set her cup down and reached for it, her pulse quickening when she saw the message. Good morning, Clara. I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd love to continue our conversation over coffee. Let me know if you're interested. Ethan. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she simply stared at the screen. A part of her knew she should delete the message, dismiss it as a fleeting moment of indulgence. Yet her fingers hovered, her heart tugged by the simple act of being thought of. Clara set the phone aside, telling herself she needed time to think. But even as she moved through the rest of her morning, Ethan's words lingered, soft and insistent. By midday, Clara found herself at her favorite cafe, a quaint little spot tucked away from the bustle of the city. The air smelled of freshly baked pastries and espresso, and the quiet hum of conversation provided a comforting backdrop. She had come here to clear her mind, but instead, she found herself rehearsing potential replies to Ethan's message, each one more conflicted than the last. The cafe door opened, and a rush of cool air swept in. Clara glanced up out of instinct, and her heart jolted as Ethan walked in, his presence effortlessly commanding. He spotted her almost instantly, his face lighting up with recognition. Clara, he greeted warmly, approaching her table. I didn't expect to see you here. Her pulse quickened, but she managed a composed smile. It's one of my favorite places, she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. Would you like to join me? Ethan accepted the invitation without hesitation, settling into the seat with an ease that contrasted her internal turmoil. I wasn't sure you'd reply to my message, he admitted, his tone casual but laced with a hint of vulnerability. Clara hesitated, then met his gaze. I haven't yet. Their eyes locked, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. For a moment, the rest of the cafe seemed to fade away, leaving only the quiet tension of their connection. Well, Ethan said after a pause, his smile returning, I'm glad fate intervened. They talked, their conversation flowing as naturally as it had the night before. Ethan's presence was disarming, his words thoughtful and sincere. Clara found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in years, sharing pieces of herself she had almost forgotten. By the time they parted, the weight in Clara's chest felt both heavier and lighter, a paradox she couldn't quite unravel. She watched Ethan disappear down the street, her fingers brushing the card still tucked in her purse. As she walked home, Clara knew she stood at the edge of a decision, one that could either pull her from the quiet shadows of her life or plunge her deeper into them. She didn't have an answer yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Her world was no longer as still as it once had been.